The Portuguese Empire, famous for spices, gold, and discoveries. But let's be honest, half of what they discovered was just new ways to misbehave in bed. Think of it as Columbus with a Tinder profile, but the bio says, "We'll conquer your land and your bedroom." So smash that subscribe button like a conquistador smashing through a monastery wall and tell me, where are you watching this from? Midnight history binge or sneaky office break? Forget dusty history books. We're diving straight into the real reason Portuguese sailors risked scurvy in storms: scandal. Take the early 1400s. Lisbon's court was less about strategy and more about scandalous matchmaking. One chronicler whispered that Prince Henry the Navigator wasn't just navigating the seas, he was navigating beds too. Imagine OnlyFans, but instead of subscriptions, you got noble titles. Pamphlets of the time joked about confessions longer than voyages. Even monks were writing satire about the noblemen's exercises. And trust me, they weren't talking about fencing practice. By the 1500s, when Vasco da Gama sailed east, Portuguese captains treated Indian Ocean ports like a chain of Tinder hookups. Spices? Yes. Trade deals? Sure. But every diary entry suspiciously reads like a 16th century version of Dear Penthouse. And the gossip spread faster than the ships. Lisbon was flooded with stories, pamphlets showing sailors with more lovers than rosaries, and caricatures of priests clutching both crosses and corsets. One pamphlet mockingly titled them the Order of St. Lust. Now pause. Imagine you're a Lisbon housewife in 1520. Your husband is at sea. Pamphlets arrive daily with stories of sailors converting women faster than priests. Do you feel proud, or do you think your man is basically running a floating nightclub? But here's the kicker. Some governors and colonies literally wrote laws allowing mistresses for morale. Yes, the empire that banned heresy legalized side chicks. Absolute Netflix comedy. And of course, gossip didn't stop there. Missionaries, supposedly celibate, became infamous in tavern stories. One pamphlet caricatured a Jesuit priest holding a globe with the caption, "He preaches continence by day and conquers bedrooms by night." Tell me that wouldn't go viral on TikTok today.
The Portuguese Empire, famous for spices, gold, and discoveries. But let's be honest, half of what they discovered was just new ways to misbehave in bed. Think of it as Columbus with a Tinder profile, but the bio says, "We'll conquer your land and your bedroom." So smash that subscribe button like a conquistador smashing through a monastery wall and tell me, where are you watching this from? Midnight history binge or sneaky office break? Forget dusty history books. We're diving straight into the real reason Portuguese sailors risked scurvy in storms: scandal. Take the early 1400s. Lisbon's court was less about strategy and more about scandalous matchmaking. One chronicler whispered that Prince Henry the Navigator wasn't just navigating the seas, he was navigating beds too. Imagine OnlyFans, but instead of subscriptions, you got noble titles. Pamphlets of the time joked about confessions longer than voyages. Even monks were writing satire about the noblemen's exercises. And trust me, they weren't talking about fencing practice. By the 1500s, when Vasco da Gama sailed east, Portuguese captains treated Indian Ocean ports like a chain of Tinder hookups. Spices? Yes. Trade deals? Sure. But every diary entry suspiciously reads like a 16th century version of Dear Penthouse. And the gossip spread faster than the ships. Lisbon was flooded with stories, pamphlets showing sailors with more lovers than rosaries, and caricatures of priests clutching both crosses and corsets. One pamphlet mockingly titled them the Order of St. Lust. Now pause. Imagine you're a Lisbon housewife in 1520. Your husband is at sea. Pamphlets arrive daily with stories of sailors converting women faster than priests. Do you feel proud? Or do you think your man is basically running a floating nightclub? But here's the kicker. Some governors in colonies literally wrote laws allowing mistresses for morale. Yes, the empire that banned heresy legalized side chicks.
absolute Netflix comedy. And of course, gossip didn't stop there. Missionaries, supposedly celibate, became infamous in tavern stories. One pamphlet caricature showed a Jesuit priest holding a globe with the caption, "He preaches continence by day and conquers bedrooms by night." Tell me that wouldn't go viral on TikTok today. Even in Goa, Portuguese elites were mocked for mixing Catholic rituals with scandalous habits. A traveler's diary snarked, "Their processions are half prayers, half parades of mistresses." It was religion meets runway, with a side of adultery. Imagine a governor's ball where half the attendees were official wives and the other half were official mistresses, seated by rank. That's not a banquet, that's a live episode of Real Housewives Colonial Edition. By the 1700s, Lisbon gossip salons were buzzing with stories of nobles competing for exotic lovers like trading cards. Pamphlets nicknamed them conquistadores de flesh. One satirical poet wrote, "They conquer lands but lose their souls between sheets." And when the empire began to decline in the 1800s, the scandals only grew louder. Newspapers joked that the Portuguese lost Brazil not in battle, but in the bedroom. Imagine losing half your empire because you couldn't keep your trousers on. So yes, the Portuguese brought spices, maps, and global trade, but behind the curtains, their empire was basically one long episode of Bridgerton on a boat. And trust me, the next scandals get even spicier. Africa and Brazil, officially about spices, sugar, and souls, unofficially about mistresses, midnight deals, and more tangled bedsheets than a modern Tinder apartment. Empire building, Portuguese edition, less holy mission, more late-night subscription plan. The Portuguese in Africa and Brazil weren't just trading gold and sugar, they were trading partners too, in ways the church definitely forgot to mention on Sunday. Missionaries arrived to save souls, but somehow ended up saving space in their diaries for colonial mistresses. Imagine a Netflix drama titled Crosses and Corsets. That's basically what was going on. By the 1500s, Lisbon gossip mills were running faster than TikTok reels. Letters sent home from Angola and Brazil described more beds than baptisms. Noblemen kept African and Brazilian concubines openly, calling them spiritual wives. Spiritual, of course, in the sense that spirits were involved, usually rum. A pamphlet from Lisbon actually joked, "The governor baptizes by day and sins by night." Printed, sold, and read in coffee houses like today's tabloids. Meanwhile, in Brazil, sugar plantations doubled as scandal plantations. Slaves were exploited for labor and for their bodies. Portuguese overseers saw themselves as kings of tiny fiefdoms, and their abuses were whispered about in Lisbon drawing rooms. One noblewoman famously remarked, "If the ships bring sugar, they also bring shame." That line made it into a pamphlet, like an early version of cancel culture. Replace TikTok cancel trends with woodcut cartoons, and you've got Portuguese colonial PR. But the clergy weren't innocent. Jesuits in Brazil, supposedly celibate, developed reputations as husbands of many villages. Some even left behind entire families of children. Satirical verses mocked them as fathers of nations. The irony? They proudly accepted the title. Lisbon poets roasted them mercilessly. Imagine an OnlyFans scandal, but instead of leaked screenshots, you had woodcut caricatures of priests holding both crucifix and cradle. People laughed, the church fumed, and the empire carried on. One pamphlet even claimed confessionals were busier at night than chapels at dawn. In Africa, Portuguese officials were no better. Governors would negotiate treaties by day and arrange parties by night. African rulers joked that the Portuguese carried two weapons, the sword and the bedpost. Not exactly the slogan for an empire. And yet, back in Lisbon, the court pretended this was all noble. Pamphlets circulated describing these men as bringing civilization. Civilized? Hardly.
Their letters read more like late-night love diaries than reports of governance. Think of HR reports replaced by erotic poetry, stamped with royal seals. By the 1600s, Lisbon was addicted to scandal. Every new ship carried not just goods, but gossip. Who seduced whom in Angola? Which missionary had 3 adopted daughters in Brazil? It was like an empire-wide soap opera, with pamphlets as the weekly episodes. By now, the Portuguese Empire had perfected the art of exporting sugar and importing scandal. And trust me, the juiciest stories are still to come. If you thought Africa and Brazil were spicy, wait till we dock in India and the East Indies, where silk wasn't the only thing being unraveled. India and the East Indies, the crown jewel of the empire, officially about pepper and pearls. But let's be honest, the Portuguese weren't just trading spices, they were trading spouses, promises, and more late-night escapades than a Netflix drama called 50 Shades of Goa. When the Portuguese landed in India, they promised civilization, conversion, and commerce. Instead, they delivered scandals hot enough to burn their silk stockings. Goa quickly became a playground for noblemen and mistresses. Colonial governors hosted parties that made Lisbon salons look like church sermons.
A chronicler once wrote, "Goa by day was a chapel, Goa by night a carnival." Translation: Sin Subscription, Colonial Edition. Missionaries were supposed to be celibate, but some became local celebrities, not for their sermons, but for their secret families. Jesuits were mocked in satirical pamphlets as the fathers of many. Priests blessing children who suspiciously looked like their own. Lisbon poets had a field day. Imagine TikTok roasting videos, but in the form of woodcut cartoons pasted on church doors. Merchants too weren't innocent. They used trading posts as cover for trysts. Letters home described commerce of souls and bodies. A governor of Goa once received a caricature showing him holding both a crucifix and a concubine. It spread faster than a meme. Meanwhile, noble women back in Lisbon read these reports and fainted or pretended to faint. Some even mocked their husbands by throwing pamphlets at dinner tables. It was Portugal's version of domestic satire. Think of a wife today screenshotting your DMs and projecting them on a dinner party wall. Same vibe. But the juiciest scandals came from the Portuguese mixing with Indian nobility. Marriages were arranged for political alliance, but mistresses were taken for pleasure. One Mughal chronicler described the Portuguese as the traders of both silk and shame. Pamphlets in Lisbon repeated this line endlessly, like an empire-wide meme. Then came the Inquisition in Goa, and oh, the hypocrisy. Officials who punished locals for sinful practices were the same men throwing masked balls at night. One satirical poem titled "The Holy Masked Carnival" sold thousands of copies. Replace OnlyFans leaks with satirical poems. Same shock value, different format. Even naval officers weren't spared. On voyages to Malacca, their cabins became dens of scandal. Sailors joked that the real cargo wasn't spices, but lovers. Caricatures showed ships with hearts painted on the sails. Lisbon's gossip culture thrived on this. Pamphlet sellers shouted verses in marketplaces, mocking governors by name. People bought them like hot bread, laughing at the empire's double life. It was empire as soap opera, acted out on every street corner. By now, the Portuguese Empire had stopped being just about maps and trade routes. It had become a live theater of scandals, with Goa, Malacca, and beyond as the main stage. And trust me, when the empire begins to crack, the gossip gets even juicier. By the 17th century, the Portuguese Empire was running out of gold, but never out of gossip. Their trade routes were collapsing, but their bedrooms
still very much open for business. Imagine a company going bankrupt, but still paying for Netflix, OnlyFans, and champagne. Decline didn't stop desire. In fact, it amplified it. As wealth dwindled, governors squeezed colonies harder, not just for trade, but for pleasures. Nobles arriving in Mozambique or Angola were rumored to spend more time in harems than in council chambers. Pamphlets described them as governors of concubines, not provinces. It was less empire, more empire-themed soap opera. In Lisbon, the clergy wasn't spared. Convents became scandal centers. Whispered stories spoke of nuns entertaining noblemen through holy rehearsals. One satirical cartoon showed a cloistered door with the sign "Open by appointment." And yet, these scandals sold. Pamphlet vendors thrived on gossip. A Lisbon market might have fresh bread in one hand, and in the other, a fresh verse about a bishop caught in bed. It was essentially tabloid journalism before tabloids existed. Think TMZ, but with ink stains and woodcuts. Sailors, too, became part of this theater. With wages shrinking, they carried stories back from Brazil and Africa. Some claimed entire ports were brothels funded by governors. Was it true? Maybe not. Did Lisbon believe it? Absolutely. The irony reached its peak when Portugal aligned with other European powers. Ambassadors whispered more about mistresses than treaties. In London, one diplomat was caricatured as the envoy of desire. That caricature spread in coffee houses faster than a viral meme. Imagine your foreign minister trending, not for policy, but for pillow talk. But the darkest scandals came from colonial punishment. In Angola, governors enforced harsh rules by day and were whispered to break every single one by night. A secret poem circulated: "He whips by sun, he drinks by moon." It spread so fast that even Lisbon children sang it as rhyme. Meanwhile, the Inquisition tried to keep control, but the hypocrisy was too obvious. A popular joke in taverns: confess in the morning, sin in the evening. Sailors loved shouting it before boarding ships. Basically, the Portuguese Empire invented the weekend double life long before Instagram influencers did. Back in Lisbon, theater troupes staged plays mocking empire scandals under the guise of allegory. Everyone knew who the characters represented, but since the costumes were Roman togas, authorities pretended not to notice. Audience roared with laughter, nobles blushed, and pamphlets doubled in price the next day.
So yes, by the time Portugal's empire was collapsing, the colonies weren't just bleeding wealth, they were bleeding secrets. And in Lisbon, scandals weren't a whisper anymore. They were the headline act. By the 18th century, Portugal was broke, beaten, and basically ghosted by history. But in their bedrooms, still premium subscriptions, no free trials. Think of it as a dying phone battery, 2% left but still opening TikTok. Scandal became survival. Nobles lost estates but clung to pleasures. Dowries shrank, yet secret lovers multiplied. In Lisbon, pamphlets openly mocked poor nobles selling silverware by day and sneaking into brothels by night. Picture a duke pawning candlesticks and then asking for discreet company on the same street. In Brazil, governors acted like kings. With Lisbon distracted, their households turned into theaters of excess. Carriages carried mistresses through streets as if part of official processions. Local poets wrote satire calling them emperors of bedchambers. Meanwhile, in Goa, priests became infamous for double lives. Confession booths were whispered to be matchmaking offices. Pamphlets circulated drawings of clerics blessing couples with one hand, accepting coins with the other. Basically, they were the Tinder premium of the 18th century. Sailors, too, turned gossip into currency. Returning to Lisbon, they sold stories of governors' harems like exotic spices. For a few coins, anyone could hear about the 10 ladies of Bahia or the midnight garden of Luanda. And Lisbon devoured it. Coffee houses doubled as gossip clubs. Political debates faded, replaced by lurid stories of noble mistresses, bishop sins, and colonial orgies. Satirical plays mocked officials so directly that nobles stopped attending theaters altogether. Imagine Netflix releasing a documentary where every episode is just your boss caught cheating. But scandal also became protest. Commoners, furious at corruption, sang dirty songs about rulers in marketplaces.
One ditty mocked the king's mistress so vividly that guards banned singing in taverns after sunset. Of course, that only made people sing louder. By the late 18th century, even foreign visitors joined the gossip. British and French envoys set reports not only of politics, but of Portugal's decadent habits. One envoy joked in a letter, "Lisbon is a city where the bed outweighs the throne." Basically, diplomatic cables were turning into gossip blogs.
As empire crumbled, scandals weren't hidden anymore, they were spectacles. Public masquerades became known as the empire's funeral dances. Masks covered faces, but everyone knew who was who. Beneath candlelit chandeliers, ruined nobles danced with mistresses, while pamphleteers scribbled fresh verses in corners. So, by the time Portugal's empire limped into the 19th century, it wasn't just trade routes that collapsed, it was dignity itself. They had fewer colonies, less money, but somehow infinite scandals. By the 19th century, Portugal had lost more land than your cousin loses followers after posting cringe TikToks. But in their scandals, oh, still premium content. It's like the empire went broke everywhere, except the bedroom economy. The empire was weak, the treasury nearly empty, but the gossip machine stronger than ever. Pamphlets didn't just spread scandal, they defined politics. Elections, councils, even royal decrees were mocked with dirty limericks. Imagine voting slips replaced with memes about your king's mistress. In Mozambique, governors threw banquets that were really disguised orgies. Dancers in feathered costumes entered halls, musicians played, and soon the entire court blurred the line between performance and bedchamber. Locals whispered it was Rome reborn, but without the dignity. Meanwhile, Brazil, before independence, perfected the second family system. Every nobleman kept one official wife and several unofficial shadow households. Satirists called them colonies within colonies. Basically, family planning meant owning 2 carriages. Lisbon's coffee houses exploded with gossip as printers produced caricatures faster than the king could issue bans. One infamous print showed a noble trying to juggle mistresses like circus bowls. The caption read, "National Defense in Practice." And priests? Still starring in scandals. Some became known as holy brokers, arranging secret liaisons under the disguise of confession. Ordinary people began calling confessionals gossip boxes. That's right, church was less about saving souls and more about scheduling hookups. The public, tired of poverty, found relief in mocking their leaders' private lives. Songs, jokes, and caricatures turned every scandal into entertainment. Even beggars sang verses about noble debauchery, shaking cups while chanting, "Alms for the empire's shame." Foreign observers didn't hold back either. British travelers wrote that Lisbon felt like a theater where the main play was adultery. French pamphleteers published scandalous travelogues that outsold serious histories. Portugal basically became Europe's tabloid capital. And through it all, masquerades kept burning bright. Nobles spent fortunes they didn't have on costumes, silk masks, and chandeliers. Behind velvet curtains, alliances were made, secrets exchanged, and scandals born. Witnesses swore that half the empire was conceived under chandeliers. By the late 19th century, decline was obvious, yet gossip still gave life to a dying empire. Even as colonies slipped away, Lisbon's presses churned out caricatures and lampoons. To the people, scandals were the last treasure Portugal still exported. So, by the time Portugal entered the modern era, its map had shrunk, its glory had faded, but its scandals, they refused to die. Truly, the empire of gossip outlasted the empire of gold.